Ed, thank you so much for joining us today in the next in our digital dialogue series, where we get to have a conversation with great leaders in tech companies, finding out a little bit more about them, their company, what makes them tick, and the exciting innovation that they're leading on. So without further ado, Ed, could you tell us who you are, what you do, and who you work for?
Hi, Matt. Thanks very much for inviting me. My name is Ed Puddicombe. I'm the strategy director and one of the co-founders of Niaxo. We're a small British technology company and we specialise in innovation, particularly data-led innovation, predominantly at the moment into the UK public sector. But obviously we've got large ambitions to branch out into private sector and maybe even go international. But you know, let's walk before we run.
Oh, exciting stuff, definitely. And you said you're one of the co-founders. When did you found Niaxo?
So it was founded by 4 of us, so we're all equal shareholders. We started in 2019, in fact, the 2nd of September, so the date that we're recording this, we're nearly, almost exactly 4 years old. The 4 of us had worked previously together. We have, all of us, been independent contractors in the past, working in all kinds of different areas. And maybe some of the listeners with a similar background might be familiar with some of the changing legislation, which was and is a pressure to people in that contracting environment. So we spent a substantial proportion of 2019 discussing how we might come together, how we might look to grow a business, what we might like that to look like. And in essence, press the button towards the back end of 2019. Interestingly, we'd actually won our first piece of work before we'd actually started the company, which was fortuitous, shall we say, a bit of data management work for a public sector body, just trying to get them a few insights, a bit of dashboarding, that kind of thing. So we're off to a good start in that sense.
That is really interesting as well, that all of you came together and you'd all come from those different backgrounds. What were you doing before this? What was sort of your trajectory?
So my background started off over 20 years ago. 20 makes me feel old, 25 years ago nearly. So I started off, in fact, in all honesty, I started off in measured building and land surveying, which is a bit of a strange one. It does what it says on the tin, measuring buildings and measuring land. So if you've seen those guys or girls beside the side of the road with a theodolite or looking at a levelling staff and that kind of thing, I started off doing some of that. And interestingly, it was a small company. They, at the time, then started to look into using photography to generate elevations of buildings. So in a nutshell, if you've got a 5-story building and you want to create a technical drawing of that elevation, the front of that building, you can't really send someone climbing up the front of it to measure all the windows. Well, you can. I mean, technically, there's a lot of things you can do, but it's not very cost effective. So what we started to look at was whether you could take multiple photographs, stitch them together, and then extrapolate measurements from then. Sort of realigning them and twisting the orientation of those photos. And that's kind of what got me into doing more of the technical stuff. The pivot away from doing that kind of surveying work, I have to confess, was predominantly driven by weather. I mean, who wants to stand in a field getting rained on when you can sit in an office instead? So it was a natural move.
And you mentioned there as well that that passion for tech, I suppose, had been instilled in you. Was it something that you were always passionate about tech? It was always something you wanted to play about with, or was it something that came through work actually, and you saw the workplace changing?
I think, I mean, I've been exposed to tech, if you like. I remember as a kid doing bits of soldering with my dad and having a Spectrum and a Commodore, I think, as well. So again, maybe giving people a few marks in the sand as to how young I might be. So definitely sort of exposed to that. I think my parents definitely, my dad's a civil engineer, so coming from that kind of technical background and liking that kind of thing. I must confess, though, I didn't specifically fall into what we would call IT or ICT or whatever you might wish to brand it as, particularly directly. So, you know, I did relatively sort of technical, sort of high level education, so maths, physics, electronics kind of thing, but I was never really into computers as such. But yeah, ended up moving across after doing that surveying work into, again, a bit of a lucky strike. I ended up essentially managing an IT system for a secondary school, which in the sort of turn of the century, again, that's making me feel old, sort of 2000-ish, IT in schools, tech in schools was really starting to kick off, and having the opportunity and the credit, the freedom to just build stuff and get things working was a real opportunity, and let me cut my teeth on, you know, managing a whole system. And yeah, it was challenging at times.
I can imagine, yeah, definitely. But I think that freedom in the tech sector to just get on to build, to do it, is one of the great liberating factors that probably inspires people like yourself in your workplace as well.
Yeah, and I think that early experience of directly witnessing that linkage between what I did by way of setting up a bit of software or configuring a smart whiteboard, those kind of things, but then literally sitting there in what was essentially my office, but with a window straight through into the classroom and seeing it being used. Not in any way trying to claim any credit. I wasn't a teacher. I've got no capacity for that kind of thing. But seeing that direct effect on users, and that I think is consistent throughout the technology industry, that the whole point of doing tech is to make people benefit from it.
Absolutely. And jumping ahead then, and you know, so 2019, back end of, you founded Niaxo, and then in the January, February, March, something pretty epic hit the globe and in the pandemic. And
yeah,
so tell me a little bit more about that, and as a new company, how that impacted you and how you reacted.
Yeah, so that I think the perhaps typically British phraseology was "that's emotional." It was a challenging time. We were in the middle of a contract with, again, a different part of government. We'd got a small, probably 8-week piece of work, couple of bits of work, got a bit of an extension from that part of government. I must confess to having, should we say, anxiety around the business about what were we going to do, how were we going to manage. So that there was that very clear risk that all of us across the UK and indeed the world, you know, saw the sands changing in front of our eyes. Now, we had a very lucky experience that we ended up having a conversation with a contracting authority in government, and to cut a very long and sort of drawn out story into a relatively short soundbite, we ended up talking to what was at the time referred to as the JBC, or the Joint Biosecurity Centre. This was, if I recall correctly, was May. So we'd been in lockdown, a couple of months at this point, 6 weeks maybe. The Joint Biosecurity Centre, again from memory, was about 14 days old as a government department, and had about 20 civil servants on secondment from other parts of government, and was kind of lodging in the Cabinet Office, I think. And I remember quite distinctly being on a video call with someone from there, and they basically said, we need to do stuff with data. We need to mine this data. We need to do clever analytics, all of those kind of things. And I essentially sketched out a picture and held it up and said, you need to build something like this. To which the response was, okay, how quick can you build it? Which, credit, and I genuinely mean that, credit to the people involved. All of what we might imagine and maybe have experience by way of challenging processes and commercial things and all of that kind of stuff, that was all out the window in a good way. And we went from a drawing to a concept demonstrator in 6 days. Again, credit to emphasise, I didn't build any of that. As my colleagues delight in reminding me, I'm the wavy arm guy. So they built it, and sort of shout out to Tim, who was absolutely critical in doing that. So we had a concept demonstrator in days, and then the sort of customer team said, yeah, that looks good. How long until we can get people using it? And of course, we reverted to type of, well, you know, what we need to do is do some requirements and do some planning, and we could maybe look at the architecture. And I think I recall them kind of cutting us off dead and saying, no, faster. What can you do? How fast can you go? So we, again, from memory, we had first user live in a month. And within about 3 to 4 months, we had the largest data science platform in government.
Wow.
400 data scientists spread across the UK. In fact, more than that. So sort of those data scientists were consultants, they were contractors, they were civil servants, all kinds of different organisations, all kinds of different IT, all logging into a platform which, again, appreciating the contribution from NCSC, they were really helpful in making sure that we delivered things that were secure and scalable and fit for purpose. So yeah, it was a journey.
Yeah. When you said it was emotional, you weren't joking, were you? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we gained some grey hairs, and again, the reflection on the sort of customer side, where we'd say, well, you know, we could either do requirement A, or we could do requirement B. Which one would you like to prioritise? And the team just saying, no, you're doing both, but we haven't got the people to do both. Well, get the people, do both, and do it faster. It's one of a few occasions in my life where it I don't think is particularly dramatic to express that the slower we went, the more risk people's lives were in. And I've said again to others in the past, up until that point, I used to refer to my short spell in Afghanistan as being the most stressful thing I've ever done. Reflecting on the military personnel, my colleagues, that's a different stress. But I would say the work that we did in that COVID response was probably 12 months of just frenetic work. That and being in a different role, so being in the decision-making seat with my co-directors, yeah, sleep was optional.
Absolutely, yeah. There was something that you said there as well, Ed, about that data and data being used. I think, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this. There was probably a point in the pandemic where everybody sat down and saw those graphs and looked at the data that was coming in every day. Before that, data seemed to be one of those things that people realised they needed, but weren't really passionate about or understanding it. Perhaps in parts of government as well, the need for data wasn't really as firmly established. Do you think that the pandemic was the thing that changed that, where people just said, we've got to get our head around this data, manage it better, understand it, look at the trends, or was that always coming down the pipes, do you think?
Well, my background, probably for the previous 10 or even 15 years, has been data management, what in some circles is referred to as data exploitation, data mining, whatever you might wish to describe it as. And actually, I think one of the things that gained us the support of those civil servants, those customers, to empower us to do what we were doing, was our description of what we term justifiable decision making. So right at the outset, and I don't wish to kind of draw too much from this. But right at the outset, I said to the person I was speaking to, you need to be as worried about what you need to do today as you need to be worried about what's going to happen in the inquiry. And they kind of looked at me slightly a squint and sort of said, what do you mean? I said, well, people are going to ask questions, quite rightly, you know, in the cold light of day, whenever that materializes, things are going to have to be explained, things are going to have to be reworked and reconsidered and justified. And that's not to say in any way that people should be dragged through the coals, you know, hauled over the coals to, but just could we have done better? It's only like agile, a retro, you know, what should we do more of, what should we do less of? Now that particularly tied in with the fortunate position of being able to build the system with full governance, data governance built in from the get-go, which again I recognise is an unusually fortuitous position because we had a greenfield environment. We had no legacy, no historic IT to have to grapple with. We just built with the latest technology, the best we could find, the quickest we could go. But to me, that data piece and the experience that I've had previously with the good things, admittedly, around things like GDPR, data protection, data security, classification, handling instructions, all of those kind of narratives. In the past, and indeed still currently, I would profess, the challenge is expressing the benefit clearly enough in order to justify taking the risk. Now, in the example of COVID, or let's imagine a significant police inquiry or a military operation or any number of other circumstances, it's usually relatively straightforward to express the benefit with enough conviction to justify the taking of the risk with the data. Now, in my experience, the challenge comes when the benefit is rather nascent or indistinguishable or proposed or hypothetical. Then the clear narrative is held by the risk. And that's where I think it's the pendulum is still on that side, that we as people who work with data or own the risk for data or any of those roles, at the moment we're still grappling with how do we express the benefit in order to justify the risk.
I think you're entirely right there, and something that increasingly companies, private sector, public sector, all aware of. Thinking about, you talked there about the innovation environment changing, the tech environment changing. What do you think some of the most exciting developments have been and what are some of the most exciting developments to come in the tech sector? And perhaps at the same time, what are some of the scariest or riskiest bits that you see there too?
Oh, yeah. I think I would be out of touch to not give a tip of the hat to AI and generative AI and things like that. But I think even in a more general sense, what one might refer to as the democratization of technology, reflecting back to that age of standalone Sinclairs and Commodores and the early IBM PCs, and indeed the earlier versions of Windows, which I think we can agree maybe had basic or rudimentary networking capabilities, whereas the fast forwarding to today, where we can get on our smartphones and order a product from the other side of the world with 5 clicks. So I think that kind of democratization and the consequence of that, which is the democratization of the knowledge that goes with it, whether that be watching online videos to achieve some kind of tutorial or learning experience, or indeed whole product sets referencing something like Duolingo, where to a greater or lesser extent one can learn foreign languages. So that idea that the world is becoming a more level place, but perhaps the consequence of that is that those that have can accelerate faster, and those that have not have no ability to accelerate at all. So there's a double-edged sword in that, perhaps.
I think you've hit something there, Ed. I want to probe on that, because I was speaking with somebody the other day, and they said, "I'm going to find a YouTube video. I'm going to do that myself." So, do you think that democratization of learning as well, the information that's there, is that starting to change the workplace too, and what we expect from people?
I think it is slightly. In a number of these circumstances, I reflect back into the kind of Windows 2000 era, which again maybe some of the listeners will be able to share with me. But I remember very distinctly the move from Windows NT into Windows 2000, particularly to draw focus, particularly in the server environment, so the commercial IT setups and this kind of thing. And the thing that people latched onto was that Microsoft were introducing wizards. And so where perhaps in the past to configure a DHCP server, you had to know how to do it, or to configure a shared printer, it was down however many menus or whatever it might be. And there was this proposition that with these magical wizards, anyone could do it. Anyone could set up an IT network, and all of those geeky IT people would be out of a job. But we haven't seen it happen, not in the least. So I think there's a really interesting point of certain things become more available, but there is always the more challenging thing that's further up the mountain. So there's always something that's more difficult. Everyone can do this clever stuff with generative AI, but there are even cleverer people who are building the generative AI. So I see it as a good thing, that democratization. But flicking back to your reference to maybe some of the bad things, is perhaps the lack of appreciation or recognition of consequence. Because if anyone can do anything, does that mean everyone should do everything? And perhaps, again, we've seen in the news things like generating imagery of other people, which is defamatory or offensive in various ways. Just because I can, and the technology enables me to, maybe I shouldn't. And again, the connectivity that we all experience, I think it's reasonable, and has been discussed by others more intellectual than me, that the disassociation of individuals, and you're just behind a screen and you're anonymous and your actions don't have real human consequence, or at least the feeling perhaps is dangerous and is worrying. Whether it be online bullying within sort of the young people at school, things like that. You can imagine this amazing technology. I can be connected, I can generate amazing pictures, and I can launch them at other people's emotions with seemingly no consequence. That's not a great place to be.
No, and I think that for many parents or carers, guardians, those who have got younger people in their care, and you talked about teachers earlier, they're probably looking at some of these innovations in technology and suggesting that, are we prepared for young people to be exposed to this way as well? Yeah. And in terms of then thinking about yourself and your journey, we talked a little bit about what inspired you before, but if you could go back and think back to your 16-year-old self, perhaps, what advice would you go back and tell a young Ed?
That's a really tough one. I think I've always achieved the mantra of regret what you do rather than what you didn't do. So I've always tried to get out and do a lot of stuff. I think one of the things that I certainly feel, certainly with the staff in the company that we've brought on recently, they're amazing, and they've picked up the stuff that we've taught them, and the things that they're doing, particularly by way of software development and coding, is alien to me, utterly disassociated from anything that I've ever done. I've done systems engineering, I've done scripting, I've done that kind of technology, but I've never truly written software. I've created some appalling web pages, don't get me wrong, but that's not proper CI/CD, DevSecOps, that kind of thing. And not to suggest a change in career, you know, winding back the clock to that era of my life, but maybe having spent a little bit of time doing what one might call proper software development, it just feels like a black art. And hats off to people who do it and do it properly. It's phenomenal when it's done well. But as I say, I've no insight to it whatsoever, and I'd love to wind back the clock and maybe have done it a little bit here and there just to feel a little bit more empowered.
And when you were, you know, sort of at school or 16 and maybe even entering the workplace, were there people who were, you know, an inspiration to you, or people that you thought, actually, that person, I want to be like that person, I want to, you know, approach life like that person as well?
Well, I think the person who probably influenced me most in that early part of my career was the lady who was the IT teacher in the school where I ran the system, a lady called Leslie, and just that freedom. You know, I was not far off 20, and she essentially said, "You work it out. You've got the budget. Have the budget. This is what we need. You do it." And pretty much everything that I suggested, regardless of how outlandish or indeed far beyond my own capabilities, she was normally entirely supportive and kind of let me get on with it. And hence the learning experience of going from a computer network with, I think, 1 server and 20 desktops to multiple servers, permanent internet connection, internet filtering, automated software deployment, all essentially built from the ground up, which certainly was a novel way to cut my teeth. So I'd take my hat off to her. Haven't seen her for probably in excess of 20 years, but you know.
Leslie, if you're listening, if you're watching, you're responsible for Niaxo. This is what you've done. You've unleashed this. That's what we can say. Yeah. And if you could do any other job then, Ed, you know, any other job in the world, you could wave a magic wand and you could do it, what would you love to do?
Oh, I think I'll adjust the question. If my career had maybe gone in a slightly different direction, there was probably a point in time which, not in any way to express any regret, but just a curiosity of a what if. What if I'd joined the military full time at that early stage? I think, well, I don't think it's particularly outlandish to suggest that things would have been entirely different. And I don't know what that entirely different would have been. I think could have given me some equally remarkable experiences. And it's certainly something that I still dip my toe in. You know, having been an Army reservist for an extremely long time now, it's something that's close to my heart. But it's that question of, what if it was full time? What if I'd actually jumped in feet first rather than just dipped my toe?
Those sliding doors moments, absolutely. Yeah. And in closing, then, lots going on for Niaxo at the moment. What's coming up that people should know about Niaxo? The things that are happening in the next couple of months that they can get involved with, or should be looking out for?
So the big ticket items for us centre around building an SME network across the UK. We're looking to work with other British SMEs, talking to defence exports, part of Department for Business and Trade, to try and sort of get that going, and indeed techUK. We've got the Defence and Security Expo, so DSEI, coming up in September, and hopefully the International Security Expo shortly afterwards in the Olympia. Both of those in London for anyone that's international. You know, air tickets are available. So some big reveals, big engagement. Really looking forward to getting into those communities and seeing what they come.
And I think SMEs have got a vital role to play in that. So we need to make sure that SMEs are talking to each other and helping each other in this process as well.
Very much so, yeah. We're really keen to see how we can contribute and sort of build that collaboration. We've done some amazing work with other UK SMEs in the last few years, and that the speed of decision making that we've experienced and the enthusiasm to get in and get on with stuff that we've experienced from some brilliant SMEs who we'll be exhibiting with and talking to in the next few weeks. You know, LinkedIn, watch out. So yeah, really good stuff.
Excellent. Ed, thank you so much for your time, giving us a bit more of an insight into you, into the company, but also your journey and your observations on the tech sector as well. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, techUK.